For 3 years, these changes were not proclaimed in force because of a series of computer glitches. There's a story in itself, Mr. Speaker. In June, when they were made, parking overtime at assigned space became $50, while exceeding time at a meter stayed at $25. There's no logic to these differential fees and fines, Mr. Speaker. The Downtown Halifax Business Commission, the Spring Garden Road Business Association, city councillors, and numerous other people in Halifax have told us about their concerns about this. So I asked the minister, what rationale can he give for this unfair change?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and that's a very good question. I thank the honourable member for bringing it forward.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Citadel on your first supplementary.
We've been working on this case with his bureaucrats all summer, and it's taken him this long for the message to at least reach him. And I'm glad that he's finally got drawn attention to this. It tells you something about the communication in his department. No one likes parking tickets, Mr. Speaker, and that's a given. But people like getting them even less when there's no justification for them. Your government has essentially admitted that the current fine is unjustified and must be changed. Yet we see no move to change it. I will table an email message I received from the Registrar of Motor Vehicles to this effect, something that clearly hasn't reached the minister, Mr. Speaker. So I asked the minister, since you have failed to correct your mistake, can you tell this House how many drivers you have forced into paying this unnecessary and unjustified extra fine?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and the answer to the question is no, I'm not able to.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Citadel on your final supplementary.
Well, the minister doesn't know too much, Mr. Speaker, and we regret it. And he's in good company on that side, Mr. Speaker. Another review is in order. When government makes a mistake...
Order, please. The Honourable Member for Halifax Citadel has the floor.
When government makes a mistake, Mr. Speaker, people expect it to be corrected as soon as the problem is made known to them. In this case, we are 4 months on and no change has been made. So I asked the minister, what will it take for your government to fix this mistake and stop levying this unjustified extra fine on drivers?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I would remind the honourable member and all members of the House, if people would fill the parking meters the way they're supposed to, we wouldn't need to have this conversation.
Honourable Member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you, Mr. Speaker, will be for the Minister of Agriculture. Mr. Speaker, this minister is sitting on proposals from the Federation of Agriculture, Nova Scotia Cattle Producers, and Pork Nova Scotia, to name a few. And yesterday, Mr. Speaker, a joint press release was issued by the Nova Scotia Federation of Agriculture and a variety of commodity groups highlighting their concerns. They have presented the minister with their long-term plans and are asking the minister, who should have by now examined their proposals, to return an answer immediately to deal with the immediate issues facing the industry. So my question, Mr. Speaker, to the minister, what can the minister tell these groups today?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government, this Premier, and this party recognize the importance of the agriculture community in the province of Nova Scotia. And Mr. Speaker, over the last 4 short years, this government has put over $30 million into the agriculture community. Over and above the programs and services that the Department of Agriculture offer. Mr. Speaker, this government, this Premier, this party recognize the importance of agriculture in the province of Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Member for Hants East on your first supplementary.
Thank you. It was the answer I expected. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. if the government has had to put $30 million into this industry in the last 4 years, that should send them a message about the lack of programs that they have or how incomplete those programs are. Mr. Speaker, I'll table this. This is from the Tory platform in the July election, sustaining smart growth, and I quote, "A new Rodney MacDonald government will ensure these industries remain part of Nova Scotia's future, sustaining the livelihoods of thousands of Nova Scotia families for many years to come by taking the following steps," and I'll quote one of those steps: "Provide immediate short-term relief for struggling farm sectors such as the red..." such as the red meat producers by implementing a one-year interest forgiveness of Nova Scotia Farm Loan Board payments. So, Mr. Speaker, we're almost to the 6-month timeline since the election, and yet that has not been implemented. So I want to ask the Minister, Mr. Minister, when are you going to act on your commitments in the platform?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, this government, this Premier, and this party are working with the agriculture community. Mr. Speaker, we are assisting sector groups to develop long-term strategies. The process that is engaged is very, very important, not only to the agriculture community, but it's important to the province of Nova Scotia. And, Mr. Speaker, whatever this government does is going to be accountable to the taxpayers as well. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Hants East on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know how the minister defines accountability if it means saying one thing and doing something else. That's not the definition that most Nova Scotians have. So, Mr. Speaker, the minister and I both know Kurt Sherman, a cattle producer who has been having a pretty difficult time, Mr. Speaker. He is not new to adversity, and he has faced a lot of it in his 42 years. He and many farmers like him are awaiting the response of this minister and this whole government on what is going to be done. So my question, Mr. Speaker, to the minister, can Kurt Sherman and other farmers like him expect some short-term help while moving their industry to a long-term plan, or were this government's commitments to agriculture just more election propaganda?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, I just want to point out that I know that it's not above the NDP to bring individuals' names to the floor of the legislature. In fact, they're very good at it, but what this government is doing is trying to be responsible to dairy, to beef, to sheep, to hogs, to hort, to fruit, and to the whole sectors out there. We realize that there's an income crisis. This government realizes it, but we're going to do something responsible, something accountable, because we all know in this House that farmers feed us all, and if you're given an opportunity, please buy local. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Digby-Annapolis.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture. Mr. Speaker, during the summer session in this House, we learned that the Department of Fisheries and Aquaculture was being reorganized into an office. Many people in this industry cannot understand why the industry that built this province is getting downgraded from a department to an office. By reducing this department to an office, we are lowering the profile of an industry that generates over $1 billion annually to this province with the potential of being much greater. My question to the Minister, can you tell us today why this is happening and what this means for the future of the fisheries of Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member opposite for the question. Mr. Speaker, he's quite right. We did split the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Fisheries and Aquaculture. They are now two identities. It's a commitment that we made, the Premier made during the leadership campaign as well as the election campaign. And we followed up on that commitment, Mr. Speaker, and we do have a minister that's responsible for agriculture, a minister responsible for fisheries, and I think it's a much better system that we have in the province today. Thank you.
The honourable member for Digby Annapolis on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the fishing industry employs 7,500 people just in the fish harvesting sector, which does not include the fish processing, the boat building, fishing supplies, and all other businesses that are involved in this important industry. Nova Scotia has the most valuable fishery of any other Atlantic province and of all of Canada. However, other Atlantic Canadian provinces we invest less than all other Atlantic provinces in the fishery. I'm scared, Mr. Speaker, that the fishing industry is about to become even more handcuffed by this reorganization. Will you state today that by becoming in office, the fishing industry will not lose any of its funding?
The Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture.
I certainly commit to that today, Mr. Speaker, and I would hope that working with my cabinet colleagues, we'll be able to enhance the budget for the Department of Fisheries. Thank you.
The honourable member for Digby Annapolis on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, we must place a greater priority on our fisheries of this province. Thousands of people rely on the industry, and it cannot be taken lightly. We must make investments to educate our fishermen on conservation, develop more sustainable fishing practices, and increase the capacity in fleets and fishing communities to manage these businesses and control the future of this industry for the growth of this province. My question is, what plans for development is your new office preparing to ensure the future for the fisheries of Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you again to the member for the question. Mr. Speaker, we are doing a number of things as far as the fishery goes. Our government has invested over $50,000 this year just in the lobster signs alone. We do have a corporate plan, a business plan that's available, and if the member wants, I can make that available to him at my earliest convenience. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question to you is for the Minister of Human Resources. Much has been made of the looming and current skill shortages our province faces. The situation is made particularly challenging by the outward migration of youth who are attracted by better prospects in Alberta. But there is another dimension to this problem, particularly within the provincial public service, which is aging quite rapidly. As of 2004, more than 34% of the civil service were 50 years or older. This means that more than 2,000 civil servants could retire within the next few years. Despite this, there is no obvious effort made by your government to deal with this situation. So my question to the Minister, why are you failing to take seriously the need to renew our civil service?
The Honourable Minister of Human Resources.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and the member opposite points out a great opportunity for many young people in Nova Scotia, and this government certainly does take succession planning seriously. That's why there is a human resources plan in place. That's why there is succession planning in place, and that's why the Nova Scotia Civil Service is a preferred employer for our youth in this province. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Nova on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The reality is that Nova Scotia has many talented people of all ages willing and ready to move into the civil service. Unfortunately, they do not see an effort made to recruit them into the public service. Instead, they see an effort being made by employers in the United States, Alberta, and elsewhere to recruit them. One of the best ways to recruit and train young people for a career in the public service is through the public service internship opportunities. Yet, in face of these looming retirements, they have not increased the number of internships. Will the Minister explain how he expects to replace 2,000 civil service by training only 16 interns each year?
The Honourable Minister of Human Resources.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and certainly the interim program, which we've doubled, is one of the avenues to allow young people an opportunity to be employed and see how the civil service, which is one of the most dedicated workforces in this province, operates and works and serves the people of this province. As I said earlier, there are a host of programs that are allowing young people through job fairs, internship, human resources strategies to become employees of the province of Nova Scotia, and certainly when you look at the job surveys, we are one of the preferred employers, and certainly there are many students applying, or graduates of universities applying for the civil service as positions become available. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Nova and your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Doubling from 8 to 16 doesn't solve this problem. We recognize, Mr. Speaker, there's just more to solving the problem than just offering more youth internships. By doing nothing is not the solution, and looking to young people to fill these positions is extremely short-sighted. My final question for the Minister: when will his government boost the number of youth internships and get serious about addressing the ageing of our civil service?
The Honourable Minister of Human Resources.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and Mr. Speaker, through you to all members of the House. Certainly, as we all know, the public service or civil service in Nova Scotia is preferred employer through the strategy of human resource planning, for the succession planning strategy. The young graduates from Nova Scotia are the preferred choice, and they will accept the majority of those jobs as we move forward into the future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Pictou East.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Natural Resources. During the June election, all parties were asked if they would support public consultations on the new natural resources strategy to be carried out by an independent third party such as voluntary planning. I know that we in the NDP supported this process, and according to the survey, which I will table, so did the Conservatives and the Liberals. A great deal of good work has come out of voluntary planning in the past, and a task such as this is right up its alley. My question, Mr. Speaker, is will the Minister of Natural Resources ask Cabinet to task voluntary planning with public consultations and the development of the new natural resources strategy?
All right, good question. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for bringing up the question, because I think it's very important to involve all Nova Scotians in the strategies that we're going to be reviewing over the next year and a half in the Department of Natural Resources. Mr. Speaker, we're going to start with biodiversity. We're going to also include forests and mining and parks. And Mr. Speaker, I think it's very important for the department and this government to be in tune with Nova Scotians, and of course we'll be consulting Nova Scotians during that process.
The honourable member for Pictou East on your first supplementary.
Consultation with all stakeholders is paramount, and their views must be expressed in the final recommendations. Since it's the recommendation and ultimately the Cabinet to develop the new resources strategy, the recommendations must be as legitimate as the consultations and come from a third party, such as voluntary planning. Will the Minister allow voluntary planning to carry out the consultations and present their final recommendations to Cabinet?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, we want many people to make presentations during this process. Public consultations is going to be the cornerstone of bringing this forward. Mr. Speaker, we want all Nova Scotians to have that opportunity. We want organizations that care about the environment. We want organizations that care about biodiversity. We want organizations that care about our forests, our mining sector. We want people that care about our parks.
Order. The time allotted for question period has expired.
Did I get around to your question?
No, you didn't, David.
Government business. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to call the order of business public bills for second reading.
Public bills for second reading.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to call Bill 117, the resumed debate of the honourable member from Halifax Fairview.
Bill 117, the honourable member for Halifax Fairview. There's 45 minutes left over.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The bill on the floor has to do with campaign finance reform, and the motion on the floor is the motion of the Leader of the Opposition for the 6-month hoist, that the bill be not debated now, but debated 6 months hence, a motion which I support. And in the time remaining to me today, I will explain why that is a motion that I support. When I left off last night, Mr. Speaker, I was in the midst of pointing out to the members of the Conservative Party that there is a part of their record of which they can be quite proud, and that is the number of individual donors, that is the number of individual voting Nova Scotians who donate to their party. And as a matter of fact, over the past many years, it has typically been a contest between the Conservative Party and the New Democratic Party as to which would have the most individual donors. Sometimes, more typically, it's our party. These days, it's the Conservative Party. But I mention that simply to say that the Conservative Party has nothing to fear from this bill. The Conservative Party receives many donations from voting Nova Scotians, as do we. And so I don't understand why the government would stake its political capital, if you will, its reputation, on a bill that has in it, or would stake the reputation opposing the very reasonable and thoughtful amendments that have been put forward or mentioned by the Leader of the Opposition as what we are seeking in this bill. We seek an end forever, for all time, and for good, of the use of the Liberal trust funds for any political purpose. And we also seek, Mr. Speaker, the elimination of all corporate and labor donations. And I think both the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party need 6 months to consider why this is good for them, it's good for the political process, it's good for the people of Nova Scotia. Let me tell a very short anecdote, Mr. Speaker, coming up from the last election, which will lead me to a quotation from the Bible, which kind of summarizes what it is that I think is at stake in this debate. I was knocking on doors one day in the Armdale neighborhood of Halifax Fairview, and I knocked on the door of a widow whose door I knocked on before and that I've had conversations with before, and so I know a little bit about her circumstances. She's not well off. In fact, she lives in what you might call somewhat straitened circumstances. This is not a person with a very high income. An elderly widow living alone in the family home, and we had a conversation. She said to me that she had made a donation to my campaign. She had just sent in a donation to my campaign, and she said to me, "It's not very much, but I hope it helps." And it wasn't until months and months later, in fact, it was only a month ago, Mr. Speaker, that I finally saw the list of donors to my campaign, and I saw that that woman had donated $10 to my campaign, which I think was quite possibly the smallest contribution of anybody who had contributed to my campaign. And yet, Mr. Speaker, and yet, that was probably to me the most heartfelt, the most welcome, the most meaningful donation of them all, because it was all she could afford. And there were many other things she could have done with that $10, but instead she chose to donate it to the candidate and party of her choice. That $10 was the most meaningful donation that I think I received in the entire campaign. And of course, Mr. Speaker, for those who know the Bible, they'll know which story this reminds me of. It's the story of the widow's mite, which I'm going to read. It's very brief, Mr. Speaker, and I'm going to pick the King James Version of the Bible. For those who know, Mr. Speaker, this is from the Gospel according to St. Mark, chapter 12, verses 41 to 44. And I just want to set this up a little bit before I read it. This is Jesus in the temple, teaching his disciples and his followers. And there's the chapter is a number of different teachings. And I should mention also, Mr. Speaker, and I know the member for Kings North will find this interesting, because he and I have discussed this before, is that St. Mark is kind of like the foundational gospel of the Bible. This was the first gospel that was written, and the other gospel writers leaned on the gospel according to St. Mark when they were writing their own versions. And so to scholars of the Bible, the gospel according to St. Mark is in some ways the most authoritative gospel because it is the closest to what Jesus himself actually did and said. And so I'm going to read the story of the widow's mite. So this is Jesus in the temple with a series of teachings to his followers. It says, and this is the wonderful, rich language of the King James Version, Mr. Speaker, and there's nothing quite like it in the English language. It says, "And Jesus sat over against the treasury and beheld how the people cast money into the treasury, and many that were rich cast in much. And there came a certain poor widow, and she threw in 2 mites, which make a farthing. And he called unto him his disciples, and saith unto them, Verily I say unto you, that this poor widow hath cast more in than all they which have cast into the treasury. For all they did cast in of their abundance, but she of her want did cast in all that she had, even all her living." Mr. Speaker, and that is a very important story. And my family was a church-going family when I was growing up, and I went to Sunday school almost every Sunday when I was a boy. And there's some stories that stay with you, and for some reason, this story of the widow's mite has always stayed with me. And yet, and I was reminded of it when I received that $10 donation from the widow in Armdale, because for her, it was everything she had to spare. And so to me, Mr. Speaker, when we're talking about not financing the temple in Jerusalem, but financing election campaigns in Nova Scotia, what is this going to be about? Is this going to be about the widow's mite, or is it going to be about the almighty dollar? Which one is going to win out in this debate, Mr. Speaker? And I place myself firmly on the side of the widow's mite. Hallelujah. Mr. Speaker, this bill, there are many aspects of it on which we could comment, but one that I want to start by commenting on is the process by which it came to this legislature. There is a consensus, has been a long-standing, long-respected consensus in Nova Scotia that there will be no changes to election law without the proposals first being passed to the Election Commission for study and debate and all-party consensus, and that no bill will be presented to the legislature dealing with election law unless all the parties have previously agreed to it, Mr. Speaker. And that's appropriate. That's right. That's the right thing to do, because when you're talking about the government, the process by which the government is elected is fundamental to the functioning of the rest of this system. That's why I said last night, that campaign finance reform is probably the most important piece of election legislation that this legislature has had before it in a generation, because it is so fundamental. And it will determine the course of Nova Scotia elections for a generation to come. That's how important this is. And yet, this bill was handed to the NDP for the first time last Thursday, 5 days ago, the day before it was introduced into the House of Assembly. It had not been given to the Election Commission. There was no prior notice or debate. There was no discussion among the parties, no consensus. The long-standing and well-respected tradition has been broken with this bill, Mr. Speaker, and that's not a good thing. And that all by itself is a reason why I support the motion for a 6-month hoist. All by itself, that's a reason for enough. This bill, which is deeply, fundamentally flawed, needs to go back to the Election Commission, or possibly to a select committee of the legislature, or possibly to a panel of experts, or possibly all of those things, because this is of such fundamental importance. This is way too important to rush through the House with a snap of the fingers and with just a few days' debate, Mr. Speaker. We see in the paper this morning, the columnist Marilla Stevenson of the Halifax Chronicle-Herald pointing out other flaws in the bill that haven't even been touched on so far in the debate. Basic, fundamental flaws that she says you could drive a Brinks truck through. Well, that's a sign of legislation that has been rushed. Legislation that has gone too far, too fast. This is far too important for that kind of thing, Mr. Speaker. This needs careful study. This needs expert commentary. And believe it or not, there are experts out there on election finances, campaign finances, party financing. And they could tell us what's going on in the rest of the country, how election finance laws in Quebec are working, how they're working in Manitoba, how they're working federally, because it's not as if Nova Scotia is plowing new ground here, Mr. Speaker. We are following other jurisdictions, and we should know more about how things are working in those other jurisdictions. Why is it, for example, Mr. Speaker, that the choice made by the government in presenting this bill is to set the donation limit for corporations and the labor movement at $5,000? I'll get into that later, Mr. Speaker, because I'm going to suggest a reason. But we know it's not necessary because Manitoba doesn't have that limit. And we read in the papers today, Mr. Speaker, a minister of the Crown in Quebec who's being investigated by the chief electoral officer because of allegations that have been made about improper fundraising. Mr. Speaker, we need to know more about that. What's going on? What are the problems? What are the loopholes? What are the things that we should be looking at to tighten up? This is far too important a topic not to get exactly right, because it is going to affect the conduct of politics in Nova Scotia for a generation. We didn't see it until the day before it was introduced. But if media reports are to be believed, the Liberal Party saw it before we did. Well, why is that? Who saw it? When? Who gave it to them? Were there discussions between those two parties about what ought to be in the bill from which the New Democratic Party was excluded? I think we need 6 months to look into that, Mr. Speaker, because there is a very important, long-standing consensus in Nova Scotia that there should be no changes to election law on which there is not all-party agreement. And there have been debates and discussions in the Election Commission about the most minute of details in the election law because of that consensus. Things that are far less significant, far less important to the political life of the province than campaign finance have gone through that process, the Election Commission process. And yet this, the most significant election legislation in a generation, has not gone through that process. Why, Mr. Speaker? I'll leave that as an open question. I think the people of Nova Scotia, once this debate is finished, will be able to make judgments for themselves about why it is that that process has not been followed on the most important electoral reform in a generation in Nova Scotia. Why was it given to one party a day before it was introduced when there had been, apparently, according to media reports, discussions and negotiations with the other party in advance? I don't think it's a coincidence, Mr. Speaker, that this should happen within months of the NDP having the best election result it has ever had in its history in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, we see the two old-style parties coming together to try to stop the NDP. I mean, that is the effect that this bill will have. I'm not imputing motive. I don't know what their motives are. I wouldn't hazard a guess. What I'm saying is that will be the effect of the bill. And I think the people of Nova Scotia will make the judgment for themselves that within months of the NDP's best ever election result in history, the other two parties are cooperating with a bill that will hobble the NDP and advantage the other parties to the detriment of the NDP, and that has broken what I believe to be a decades-long consensus that there will be no reform of election law presented to the House without prior discussion and agreement at the Election Commission. Mr. Speaker, I want to talk about why the Liberal Party in particular needs more time to think about this. I want to talk, and then I'll get over to the Conservative Party, but I want to talk about why the Liberal Party in particular needs 6 months. It is a matter of record that 6 months will take us several weeks past the next Liberal leadership convention, Mr. Speaker, and I personally don't believe that the next leader of the Liberal Party, no matter who he or she turns out to be, wants to have the stain of these trust funds hanging over their head. It is necessary and appropriate to give all of the candidates for the leadership of the Liberal Party the opportunity to say whether they believe that the Liberal Party of Nova Scotia should use these funds for political purposes or not. Because frankly, Mr. Speaker, I don't think all the contenders will agree. And yet, if we pass this legislation now, we've lost the opportunity for Nova Scotians to hear from them. Many people say that the member for Annapolis is a potential contender for the Liberal leadership, and I think he should be. He's a very good member. I want to know, is the member for Annapolis in support of this use of these trust funds, or is he not? I think we need 6 months to find out. The members of the Liberal Party need 6 months to find out. The people of Nova Scotia need 6 months to find out. Because, Mr. Speaker, we haven't heard from him yet, although there's going to be plenty of opportunity over the days and weeks to come for him to stand in his place and tell us where he stands on this issue. I don't believe, Mr. Speaker, if I know that member, I don't believe that he supports this use of these trust funds, but I think we need an opportunity to ask him. Now, in the neighbouring riding to Halifax-Fairview of Halifax-Clayton Park, we find another Liberal member whose name is often mentioned as a potential leadership contender. I have gotten to know that member quite well, and I believe she is a very sincere, very intelligent, hard-working member of the legislature, and I believe she, too, ought to be a candidate for the Liberal leadership. She's earned the right to put her hat in the ring and to be judged as a serious contender. If I know that member, Mr. Speaker, I don't believe that she supports this use of those Liberal trust funds. But we're never going to know if we pass the legislation now. We need 6 months to get us past the Liberal leadership. How can we impose this kind of election campaign reform on a leaderless party? They deserve the opportunity to pick their permanent leader at the end of April and to have that leader be on the record with the members of the Liberal Party and the people of Nova Scotia about whether they are going to support the use of those trust funds. Mr. Speaker, I understand there's a member who wishes to make an introduction, and I'm glad to cede the floor for that.
Thank you, honourable member. The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour on an introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you very much to the honourable member. And the gallery opposite, I want to introduce a well-known Nova Scotian, Dr. Ivar Mendez, who's the professor and head of the Division of Neurosurgery and chairman of the Brain Repair Center at Dalhousie University. Also a well-known sculptor, and has just published a book on Bolivia and very involved in humanitarian work in the country of Bolivia. Entonces estamos felices de tener esta oportunidad. So if you could please welcome Dr. Ivar Mendez to the House.
Thank you. The honourable member for Halifax-Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The other member of the Liberal caucus whose name is often mentioned as a potential candidate for the leadership is, of course, the member for Richmond, the interim leader. Now, he's not the permanent leader, and I don't think it would be fair for us to allow a party with merely an interim leader to make these kind of momentous generational decisions about campaign finance. And I rather worry, Mr. Speaker, that the view of the member for Richmond on the use of the trust funds will be different from the view of the member for Halifax-Clayton Park and the member for Annapolis. And that is yet another reason which all by itself ought to be sufficient for us to hoist this bill for 6 months, because what I anticipate, Mr. Speaker, over the next number of months, it's a real contest of ideas within the Provincial Liberal Party. There is going to be, I believe, at least one leadership contender who is foursquare in favor of the use of these trust funds that were raised through criminal activity in Nova Scotia. And as I said last night, Mr. Speaker, people were charged and convicted over the money that was put in these trust funds, so I don't mind using the word criminal because there were criminal convictions entered. I believe one of the contenders for the Liberal leadership supports the use of those ill-gotten gains, Mr. Speaker, and I believe there are two other contenders who do not support that use. And I'm looking forward to that debate, but we can't have that debate if we pass this bill now, because then the law will be done. It'll be a fait accompli, Monsieur le Président, un fait accompli, an accomplished fact, an established fact. And I don't think that's fair to the Liberal Party or the people of Nova Scotia to undercut that debate at all by passing the bill now. There may be other contenders in the Liberal caucus for leadership. I myself don't understand why the member for Kings West is not mentioned as a potential leadership contender. I think he would be an excellent contender. Perhaps he doesn't want to compete with his fellow Annapolis Valley MLA, the member for Annapolis, who I really think is a very serious contender for the job, and should be. I don't believe that the member for Kings West either supports this use of the trust funds. And how do I know that, Mr. Speaker? I'm going to tell you. Recently in the news, there was an issue about patronage. I won't mention the name because I think we all know who I'm talking about. And when after a Public Accounts Committee meeting, when the member for Kings West was asked about past fairly recent instances of Liberal patronage, he said, there are some new members of the Liberal Party who do not believe in the old ways. I'm paraphrasing, but that was roughly what he said. New members of the Liberal Party, new Liberals, I think he called them. And I think that if that member believes that there is a core, a cadre of people within the Liberal Party that we might call new Liberals, that he may want to lead them. And he may want to show that not only are those new Liberals opposed to Liberal patronage, which is in the so very recent past for the Liberal Party, but he would show that he and the new Liberals are opposed to the use of these trust funds, the money for which came from a corrupt kickback scheme, Mr. Speaker. Now, and that's what the courts say. Those aren't my words. Those are the words of the court. I'm simply quoting the court. And we think sometimes, Mr. Speaker, that this is all in the distant past. You know, the Leader of the Opposition referred to the fact that the evidence in the court had to do with the period from 1970 to 1979. And in case anybody was unsure why that period, is because there was a provincial Liberal government from 1970 to 1978. And of course, it's only when you're the government that you have an opportunity to engage in these schemes, Mr. Speaker. But it's not. This is the stuff of Gomery, which was same thing, different time. The Gomery Commission talked about a scheme of advertising in the province of Quebec, which involved, and it is proven, it is established again by criminal convictions, Mr. Speaker, that contracts were awarded on the understanding that a certain amount of the money would be paid into the coffers of the Liberal Party. And that's only, how many years ago is that? It's only a handful of years ago. This is not something in the distant past. Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Party likes to paint itself as the party of law and order. Well, I have an idea for the Conservative Party. If they want to, instead of just talking about law and order, and as my colleague, the member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage, has pointed out on many occasions, very eloquently, there is a long distance between what this government says on justice issues and what it actually does. I think he might very well be one of the best justice critics this House has seen for a very long time, Mr. Speaker. He has taken the government to task over and over and over again about the distance between what they say and what they do. Well, Mr. Speaker, let me help the government close the gap on this issue. If they want to be the law and order party, if they want to show that they believe in the rule of law, if they want to show that they're serious about cleaning up Nova Scotia politics, then let them do so by denying to the Liberal Party the use of the proceeds of crime. Mr. Speaker, let them show that they do not believe in political corruption. Let them show that they will not allow illegal activity to become part of the Nova Scotia body politic. Let them show that no amount of time will cleanse money raised in a corrupt way. Because that is what this bill does. It essentially says, well, 30 years have passed. We're not going to allow the Liberal Party to use it for this purpose, but we're going to allow them to use it for that purpose. Mr. Speaker, in any other aspect of public policy or public business, that would be laughed out of the legislature. It would be laughed out of court. It would be, the public would find it ridiculous that if somebody has gained millions of dollars through corruption, what we're going to do is tell them they can only use it for certain purposes. Mr. Speaker, instead of focusing on the criminal activity and forcing the party that benefits from that criminal activity to give up these proceeds of crime, which is what they are. I can't say it enough, Mr. Speaker. It is the proceeds of crime, Mr. Speaker, and they must not be allowed to use it for any purpose. Some will say that that money should be given up to the Treasury of the province of Nova Scotia. Because let's be very clear, that money was taken from the people. It wasn't taken directly, but it was taken because of higher liquor prices. It was taken because of higher government contracts. These kickbacks to the Liberal Party were simply built into the price, the bid price of contracts awarded by the province of Nova Scotia. We know that happened. And in case anybody over on that side of the House is feeling too self-satisfied, Mr. Speaker, I have read the history of the post-war period of Nova Scotia politics, and the historians are in accord, Mr. Speaker, that the Liberals did not invent toll gating. They didn't invent the practice of toll gating in 1970. That wasn't an idea they had. What they did was they continued a practice that had been going on before then. It appears that the practice of toll gating started under the Conservative government, Mr. Speaker, in the 1950s. Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the Conservative Party could stand an inquiry into their fundraising practices, Mr. Speaker, because let's be very clear about this. Toll gating did not start in 1970 with the Liberal Party. They got caught. They were punished, Mr. Speaker. And I think the Conservatives need 6 months to really reflect on that fact, Mr. Speaker. I really think they do. Now, I've talked about the first reason why the 6-month hoist is appropriate is because the long-standing and important consensus among the three parties that all election legislation should go through the Election Commission and should not come to the floor of the House without all-party consensus has been broken with this bill. All by itself, that is a reason why this bill should not be voted on now. That's why we need 6 months, so it can be returned to the Election Commission so that we can go back to that long-standing, important, and necessary practice. I've talked about another reason, Mr. Speaker, which all by itself is a reason for the 6-month hoist, and that is the fact that the Liberal leadership contenders, the, at the moment, leaderless Liberal Party, needs an opportunity to have a full airing of this very important issue. We need to hear from the candidates for the Liberal leadership about where they stand on the use of these funds. I have a feeling, Mr. Speaker, that there will be differing views among the leadership contenders on this. We are trying here to free the Liberal Party from its darker nature. There is a tussle within the soul of the Liberal Party, Mr. Speaker. There's a struggle within the soul of the Liberal Party about whether they want to use this money or they don't want to use the money. And you can see it in the members. You can see them, most of them. You can see most of them struggling with this issue, Mr. Speaker, and I want to help them deal with that struggle. 6 months. 6 months. So that they can have a full airing, a full debate within their own party so that they can find their better nature. And I know it's there, Mr. Speaker. I know lots of Liberals. Heck, I used to be one myself. But I left the Liberal Party, Mr. Speaker, and there was a reason why I left the Liberal Party. And it has, well, it's too long a story.
It would take 6 months.
Yes, as a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, it would probably take about 6 months to tell. However, let me simply say this. I still have my John Turner Youth T-shirt. I was at the Liberal Leadership Convention, the Federal Liberal Leadership Convention in 1984, as a youth for John Turner. And then I moved to Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, and you know what? The Nova Scotia Liberal Party had nothing to say to me. They weren't talking about the issues that were important to me. I listened to them, and I listened to the Conservatives, and they were saying just about the same thing. You know, you might as well call them the Blue Party and the Red Party, or the In Party and the Out Party, because for all the difference there was between them. And then I met a nice young man who had just recently been elected as the MLA for my constituency at the time, and that was Robert Chisholm. Back in 1991, and finally I found an MLA who was talking to me about issues that mattered to me. That's when I joined the NDP. I joined the NDP in 1991, very shortly after Robert Chisholm was elected as the MLA for Halifax Atlantic for the first time. And here I am. But I left the Liberal Party for a reason, Mr. Speaker, because of the struggle within the party over finding its better nature. And I just did not see, I saw too much, Mr. Speaker, of the people who wanted to keep things the way they were, the people who didn't want to change, the person who would do whatever it took to win. And I'm here, like all the members, Mr. Speaker, to accomplish things. So there's things that I think need to be done to improve the government, especially the lives of the people of Nova Scotia. And I did not see the possibility of my doing that within the Liberal Party of Nova Scotia. So I never did join the Liberal Party of Nova Scotia when I moved here, although I had been, when I lived in Manitoba, I was a member of the Liberal Party of Manitoba. But there's a reason, as I say, there's a reason, Mr. Speaker, and I think they need 6 months to think this through, to allow their better nature to win out. Because here's a contrast, and I haven't even gotten onto the Conservative Party. I mean, you know, my time's running short, but I foresee the opportunity to speak for several more hours on this bill over the next couple of weeks, Mr. Speaker. So I'm going to get to the Conservative Party another time, I think. But I just want to focus again on the Liberal Party and why they need 6 months to think about this bill and the use of these trust funds. I want to set up a contrast here between the Liberal Party and the NDP, the party of which I'm proud to be a member, of the caucus here in the Nova Scotia legislature, Mr. Speaker. And the contrast is this. Currently, for reasons that are difficult to explain, at least concisely, the Liberal Party has the awesome responsibility of holding the balance of power in a minority government. The Conservative government has decided that their partners for the purpose of survival will be the Liberal Party. But it's not clear what it is that the Liberal Party is seeking out. But I will say one thing, Mr. Speaker. One of the Liberal bills that is going to be passed this sitting, of all the issues that the Liberal Party could choose to put on their wish list, of all the issues, One of them is to declare the brook trout the provincial fish of Nova Scotia. I'm still waiting for the first phone call or email in my constituency office from the brook trout lobby saying, please, you must pass this bill. It reminds me a little bit of jokes, Mr. Speaker, about, you know, if you find the genie's lamp and you rub it and you get 3 wishes, what do you wish for? Well, they have 3 bills that are going to pass this time, and one of them, of all of the things they could have done to make lives better for the people of Nova Scotia, one of them is to declare the brook trout the provincial fish. Now, I don't think anybody asked the brook trout. I don't know. Oh, I'm on Bill 117. This is the contrast. What I'm trying to set up here is the contrast between what they're, because of course where this all leads, of course, is that right now, for the first time in quite a while, we see the Liberals and Conservative allied to pass a piece of legislation, namely Bill 117. But, you know, while we're on the subject of the brook trout, Mr. Speaker, I don't know what this is going to do for the brook trout. I mean, if the brook trout is wriggling in the net of the member for Preston, taking its last gasp on earth, says, no, let me go. Let me go. I'm the brook trout. I'm the provincial fish. And, Mr. Speaker, I don't think, Mr. Speaker, that's going to save that brook trout. The member for Preston is going to fry up that fish faster than you can say missed opportunity. Which brings me back to Bill 117, Mr. Speaker, about Mr. Speaker, of all the things they could have done for the people of Nova Scotia, the thing that they are staking this sitting on is campaign finance reform that allows them to keep their trust funds. Yeah. Of all the things they could have done, in contrast, what did we do when we held the responsibility of the balance of power under a previous premier, Mr. Speaker? We ended the odious practice of charging seniors for their health care in nursing homes, Mr. Speaker. And it wasn't easy. Let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, it was not easy. They fought.
That's right.
And it took us, I think it was the better part of 2 years. I knew you were a fiddler. I didn't know you were a comedian. Better part of 2 years, Mr. Speaker, for us to get the government to do that. But we did it because it was the right thing to do. And then when we were done with that, we told them that they needed to do something about tuition fees for students, which is an issue not just for students, but their families. And, Mr. Speaker, they haven't gone far enough, but they've gone some ways toward it, and I'm proud of that. And when we were done with that, Mr. Speaker, we set out on a campaign to get them to finally remove the 8% provincial tax from sources of home energy, Mr. Speaker. And they said for 2 years or more, impossible, can't be done. And lo and behold, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to say that on December 1st, Mr. Speaker, December 1st, we are going to finally see the 8% provincial tax.
Order, please. The Honourable, the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Speaker, you know, technically, and still, we cannot remove that provincial portion of the HST. What we could do is to provide a rebate equal to that portion, and I think it's very important for that member to understand that, and he knows that, and he is trying to spin something a little bit differently.
Thank you for the point of information. The Honourable Member for Halifax Fairview.
Mr. Speaker, the tradition continues of members on the other side not standing up in debate and saying their piece, but standing up on baseless points of order, Mr. Speaker. Okay, so on a technicality, the minister, but that's not what they were saying to the people of Nova Scotia. They're saying it couldn't be done. Now it's done. And I'll let the minister explain to the people in my constituency the difference between removing the 8% tax and getting an 8% rebate deducted from their bill. And we'll see if he can explain the difference. I know, I mean, I'm the finance critic. I understand there's a difference, Mr. Speaker. But I don't think the people of Nova Scotia who are finally going to get that rebate much care about the technical difference between the two things. Those are what we did with our 3 wishes, Mr. Speaker, We made sure that seniors in nursing homes were treated fairly. We made sure that post-secondary students and their family got a break in tuition. And we made sure that all Nova Scotians paying for energy costs finally get a break, Mr. Speaker. That's what we did with our 3 wishes. The Liberal Party wants to declare the brook trout the provincial fish, and they want to pass campaign finance reform that puts the legislature's seal of approval on trust funds that were earned through criminal activity. Let me say it again in case anybody missed it the first time. Mr. Speaker, people, the leading fundraisers of the Liberal Party of Nova Scotia were charged and convicted of criminal offenses, and the money they raised are still, 30 years later, sitting in those trust funds. This is going to be, I think, Mr. Speaker, a test for all of us about how we view that money. How far is the government willing to go to defend those Liberal trust funds? I think we're about to find out, Mr. Speaker, because it's going to take a couple of weeks at least for them to get this through the House. Because we know that with the cooperation of the Liberal Party, they have more votes than we do. They can pass it if they choose to, but they're going to have to sit in their chairs for whatever hours they declare for the House, and we're going to test their resolve about whether this is really where they want to spend their political capital. In any other field of life, if the government were to put a bill on the table, Mr. Speaker, proposing that the proceeds of crime could be used for certain purposes and not others, Mr. Speaker, I can't imagine what the reaction of the public would be. And yet they seriously put a bill on the table saying, well, I don't think the Premier's been listening, Mr. Speaker. Let me say it again. Let me say it again, Mr. Speaker. The money in those trust funds was put there by people who were criminally charged and criminally convicted and criminally sentenced for obtaining that money and putting it in the trust funds. Is that clear enough for the Premier, Mr. Speaker? And he says facetiously, is that parliamentary? This was criminal activity, Mr. Speaker, and I'm not characterizing it as such. It is the courts of Nova Scotia that characterized it as such and convicted and sentenced those people. And one of them got off on a technicality having to do with the judge's charge to the jury. Okay? And he, Mr. Speaker, he, who was a senator at the time, because in the middle of this period he was appointed a senator, and why not? He'd raised you might call it a barrel full of money for the Liberal Party. Why should you not appoint him a senator? And did he have to give up the job? Did he have to give up his salary and all the perks of office? Did he have to give up his pension, Mr. Speaker? Did he have to resign? No, he didn't, actually. He retired at age 75 with full pension, Mr. Speaker. And I wonder how much resolve the government feels to go to the wall for that. I wonder if the government is willing to spend its political capital to allow the Liberal Party to use those funds for those purposes, Mr. Speaker. If they are, then over the days and weeks to come, it will be abundantly evident to the people of Nova Scotia. Hear, hear. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Hear, hear.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It gives me pleasure to rise here today at 12:03 to talk about Bill 117 and the hoisting of that. Mr. Speaker, I've been able to stand here yesterday and today and listen to my honourable colleagues talk about the reasons why Bill 117 should indeed be put off for at least 6 months. And the two main reasons that we're looking at today and yesterday are the amount limitations on donations to election campaigns and whether or not those amounts are the right amounts. And also, we're looking at the issue of the Liberal trust funds and whether or not those funds should be used, taken away, given back, what have you. When listening to my colleagues yesterday, I can't help but wonder, what the heck am I doing here? Seriously, Mr. Speaker. I mean, caucus meeting yesterday, it feels like I've been here for 8 days already this week. And this is only Tuesday. But when you go to a caucus meeting and find out, you know, here's a bill, I hadn't even laid eyes on the bill, and now I need to be able to stand up here and speak for an hour on the reasons why this bill should be held up for 6 months, hoisted. Now, before becoming elected in 2003, I didn't know what that meant or what that entailed, Mr. Speaker. And I guess I'm going to find out today, and I've seen what it meant yesterday. And what it means is that the House hours are going to be extended far into the night and into the early morning hours. But I guess that's one of the things that when I signed up for the job, I didn't know was part of the job. And I think, you know, it's a good time for me to stand here and reminisce a little bit about, you know, when I'm saying, what the heck am I doing here? I really, some days I wonder. And I have to wonder when I see a bill like this come through that is basically going to allow another party to use ill-gotten funds for running their campaigns or in between campaigns, using it for whatever purposes they deem necessary. I know when I ran my campaign, I had to put up with a billboard in front of my campaign office from another, one of the people that was running against me. And I know in the last election, just the one we just went through in June, if anybody crossed the old bridge, we like to call it, you would have seen the nice Liberal billboard with the Liberal team or whatever they were calling themselves at the moment. Now that billboard was up there for a very long time, and a very long time after the election, which I always wondered about that. How did, you know, where do you ever find the money to put up these big billboards? Because I don't think I'm probably ever going to come up with any kind of money like that in my campaigns. But my background in community activism and my background on being president of a homeschool, my background being involved with the Halifax Regional School Board is really a background of grassroots, Mr. Speaker. And I don't think this bill, as it stands today, is going to allow for anybody in a lot of sectors, in my community specifically, my constituency association, the constituents that phone me for help, the grassroots activists in the community, it's not allowing for any kind of an input for any of these people. And where the heck did this bill come from? I mean, if we're talking about the future of the province, because that's what elections really boil down to, is who is going to stand here and talk about the issues that are important to our families and our children. And the only people that are going to do that is people that are elected. And how we're elected, I think, is very important to the people at home. Now, maybe, you know, I know we've stood here and heard 5 of us already, or 6. I'm 6. I'm number 6. Go on, 7. Go on about this for an hour. And I will apologize now if I'm going to repeat some of the things that have been said prior to me talking. I don't want to bore people to death, but...
No, she can repeat other people. She can't repeat herself.
You know, if I start repeating things that have been said in the last, well, only one day, although it does seem like 8, I feel need to do that, because I feel the people of Nova Scotia need to have their voices heard. And I am the mechanism right now in this time slot to do that.
Hear, hear.
So, you know, it's a little bit distracting sometimes when you're in here because there's action going on around you. People are trying to get their gear together, get their notes together because they're going to speak after you or maybe tomorrow. And, you know, I go back to, you know, yesterday morning, not having a clue that I would be standing here this afternoon. Yet, you know, this job is an MLA, which I had really not an inkling of what that would mean. In fact, the first time, Mr. Speaker, I ever set foot in this building was when I was when I was on Halifax Regional School Board, and I came over here and helped the teachers picket. And I held the picket sign. I came over on the ferry. It was a windy, cold, windy, miserable day, rainy, and I remember coming over with my little document from the Halifax Regional School Board on budget items. And I got up into the face of John Hamm at the time, our premier, past premier, and asked him what he was going to do for the kids in Nova Scotia. So by hoisting this bill and delaying this bill for 6 months gives us an opportunity. Let's talk to let's talk to the voters. We're making decisions here that affect possibly, I think there's somewhere around over 600,000 official possible voters, although in the last election, I believe only around 400,000 went out to vote, and you have to wonder why. When this is the kind of stuff that happens, why would people bother going to vote? I mean, people are fed up with elections in this province. I mean, if everybody in this room went to the doorsteps, you know, in June, nobody said, oh, thank goodness, you know, another election, just what I've been waiting for, because, you know, we just had a federal election.
6 months.
So that's one of the reasons why, you know, we have to stand here and talk about why this bill needs to go through another process. And we all know that the processes are there and they're set up, and that, from what I understand, Mr. Speaker, there's a select committee that's made up of all parties that could have looked at these issues that are contained in this bill. And I believe, actually, when I heard the minister stand up and make his comments, at the very end, he said that he would allow a select committee of the House to look at it after the bill passes. I think, you know, I don't want to quote him exactly, but I'm pretty close. I think that's close to what it was. But I think the process is backwards, and that's one of the reasons why, you know, we need to now, you know, flip it over.
Explain that.
And, you know, really look at the way the process should be. And the process really should be one in which we have to look at the history of what's happened here in this province. You know, Mr. Speaker, one of the reasons why that we're here and we want to hoist this bill for 6 months is because of the trust fund issue that now we've heard a lot about. And I don't know if I'm really naive or I don't run in the right circles, but, you know, I've always heard vague, you know, implications of what had happened with that. And in fact, different times, you know, when I've been campaigning, people would actually make jokes about that. But I have to say, I got quite a bit of history lesson here in the last day, Mr. Speaker. And I don't think we want to repeat history, and indeed we want to maybe see if we can make some corrections into what has happened previously, Mr. Speaker. And that's why, you know, we need to put this off for 6 months, because we need to give the people of Nova Scotia a chance to look at some of the issues. And I think maybe in tomorrow's newspapers, we might be seeing more information go to people, because, I mean, I was more of a community activist than a politically involved person, Mr. Speaker, before getting elected. And if there was somebody to help and they asked me to help them, then I would try and do my best to do that. I think the people of Nova Scotia, you know, need to be given a little history lesson on, I guess, what, you know, they're calling toll gating, kickbacks. You know, I've heard lots of people talk about, you know, the criminal activities that actually did happen. And I don't know, you know, we don't learn about this in history, I guess, in school. It's not taught. I guess it's maybe left out of the history books. Maybe it'll be in the history books in future, I don't know. But, you know, we need to give people a 6-month chance to really decide that money that was taken from them back in the 50s to the 70s, I guess. What should we do with that money? Because I know I've got probably people in my constituency that would line up and tell you what can be done with that money, Mr. Speaker. And I think it might take 6 months for me to hear from all those people. And they might want to be emailing me. Maybe when I go home tonight and plug in my laptop, I'm going to have some emails. And you know what? I'm going to put it out there now. If somebody wants to email me and tell me how they think that $3 million or whatever's left in there, because, I mean, I don't think anybody really knows how much money is left in there, Mr. Speaker. Maybe they need to tell me how they think the government could spend that. And maybe after I finish speaking, a Liberal MLA can stand up and tell us how they would like to see that money spent. Because I've heard them in here complain about things. In fact, you know, if you look at question period today, you know, they were talking about various issues. And, you know, the gas pipeline, things like that. They come in here and they ask questions the same as we do. And they're trying to do their job. And I think there's Liberal MLAs in the House that, you know, maybe there's a division there somehow, that maybe some of them would like to see this money spent on, let's get some senior housing, let's get some, you know, let's get some more food in the food banks. Maybe we could do some, something with long-term care. I mean, how much food would $3 million buy you?
Feed the hungry.
Maybe well, there's another example where we need 6 months so that Feeding Others of Dartmouth or any of the other organizations that provide food for homeless or people that can't provide their own nutritional meals, maybe they'd like to email me and tell me how much. I'd like to know how much food $3 million would purchase in this province. So, but really, for me to stand here and, you know, I think I need to stand here and say to people, even though this may have happened a long time ago, although it's not that long, I guess, 50s to the 70s, is that, you know, what needs to be done with that money now? I mean, a bad thing happened, and, you know, you tell your kids, okay, there's no such thing as a bad child, really, Mr. Speaker, is there? There's no such thing as a bad child. Children sometimes do bad things, but you forgive them, right? And maybe the people of Nova Scotia would like to forgive the Liberal Party for what happened in the 50s and 70s. I don't even know if the people that did this are even still around, but the Liberal Party is still benefiting from ill-gotten gains or toll gating or kickbacks or, you know, kickbacks on contracts. But I didn't know that, you know, possibly, well, I wouldn't have been going in the liquor stores in the 70s, but anyway. But, you know, obviously people were. And people were going in and purchasing what they wanted and not realizing that they were actually subsidizing the Liberal Party, I guess. I don't really know if I'm using the right words. But a lot of money was built up in some kind of a, I think the Liberal Party calls it a trust fund. So I think we need to hear from the voters of Nova Scotia and my constituents as what they think needs to be done with this trust fund. I've got people in my constituency that last winter couldn't heat their homes. And some of them have had to move out of my constituency so that they could get an apartment that included heat because they simply could not afford it. And they knew that the Keep the Heat program was not going to be reoffered this winter. So I'd like to hear from some of these people and how they think this 3 million, whatever, how much is in there, is left. But, you know, Mr. Speaker, sometimes this job, what I'm trying to say is, you know, when I listen to the other speakers talk and I think, well, what the heck am I going to say that's any different than what's already been said? And it just got me to thinking that you know, what is this job all about? And sometimes, you know, I know in my constituency office, I think other people agree, you feel like you're a social worker. Well, I've not been trained in social work, I'll tell you right now. And I do the best I can. In my constituency, my assistants, I have a full-time and a part-time constituency assistant. Because I think that's the best, one of the best places to put your money in your constituency office is with your assistants. Because those are the people that are answering the phone, they're in the front line, they're doing your casework, and these are the people that, you know, are in touch, you know, along with me, with my community. And my community has the right, I believe, as does all other Nova Scotians, to take 6 months to look at this, to maybe flip the process back over to the way that it should be. Now, Mr. Speaker, you know, as I said, we don't want history to repeat itself, and we don't want to go backwards. And I really think this is an opportunity, and I think the Liberals, you know, they should take this as an opportunity. I'd like to get up in the morning and read a headline that says, Liberal Party gives back trust fund. And it's going to buy X tons of food for the food banks. Wouldn't that be nice and happy just before Christmas? I mean, that's another thing, Mr. Speaker. Here we are, we're moving into Christmas season, and we're all going to be stuck here together like a happy little bunch talking about Bill 117 and why we need to keep this going for 6 months. Because, you know, now I'm wishing I had got more of my Christmas shopping done on the weekend. But, you know, I can put anything off, I guess, you know, because this is very important. And I guess, you know, I've got a family that will pick up the slack for me and help me out. And I feel I've been elected, and this is too important of a bill to let it flip through here, and it's a backwards bill, and it's allowing illegal, ill-gotten money to be used by a party. And I just don't understand that, Mr. Speaker. And I mean, I never followed that through the legal system when it was going on, and I apologize for that. Maybe I should have. But, you know, Mr. Speaker, the thing is, Mr. Speaker, you know, what we're talking about here, too, is donations. And what's the right amount to set for the top limit of a donation to a party, Mr. Speaker? And I think the people of Nova Scotia, they might have something to say on that. Because I think, you know, I know from, you know, I think many of us in this House would say that, you know, a lot of your donations, I know from mine, are small. And they come from everybody, all walks of life. And indeed, you know, it's always a struggle within a constituency association and your election team to do all this fundraising, you know? And it puts a strain on your membership. It puts a strain on your executive. It puts a strain on your community. It puts a strain, really, Mr. Speaker, on people that want to help you out. And they do, because, you know, you'll get, I know myself, I've got a great team that helps me out, and they do everything they can. But, you know, we all have to pay our bills and our mortgage and our light bill and all these things and buy groceries. And I don't think many of them really have $5,000. If they did, I don't really even think, you know, should they give it to me? Really? That's a lot of money. And, you know, you can put a roof on for $4,000. I have constituents that are calling me, seniors, that need new windows. You know, their windows are leaking, the heat's flowing out through. They need a new roof. They need these things, and I don't think they want to be putting $5,000 into my election campaign, and I don't think they should have to. So maybe, you know, this bill will give us a chance to have the select committee go out to the people of Nova Scotia and find out what kind of a limit do they think is reasonable. Because, you know, we've heard a lot of people talk about, you know, well, let's not take any money from corporations. Maybe that should be zero. And you know, corporations sometimes in here sort of tend to get a bad rap, I guess. And I don't, you know, they're not. They're in business. They've got a product, whatever it is they're doing. And Mr. Speaker, I think, you know, sometimes corporations and businesses even that you go to feel that, you know, these elections are a pain in the somewhere. And, you know, they're trying to do what they can if they do support a party, and not all, you know, businesses or corporations support a party, I don't imagine. But, you know, it's funny because it reminds me of something a couple of weeks ago. My husband was talking to a friend of ours that we used to see a lot more of when our children were younger. And he inquired as to what I was up to and was I still, you know, in here and what was going on. And he said, oh yeah, she's still at that. And he said, you know, Joan is the only one that never came to me and asked me for money. And he owns a business. He owns a couple of businesses. She was the only one that never came to me and asked for money. Now, you know, sometimes I heard our honourable member from Halifax-Needham talk about how the first election she was in, her first campaign, her campaign manager said, get the heck out there and bring in some money. Well, you know, that's another thing that, you know, when you're in a campaign, what other job in this province requires you to go out to really your bosses who live in every house in your constituency and knock on the door and say, please, you know, I'm trying to do a good job. Will you consider letting me try and do it for another little bit of time? And then to, you know, have to say, and, you know, with your hands out, can you please give me money? Now, Mr. Speaker, it's ironic because when I first started, the path I took to end up here is working through my home and school association. And you couldn't find a better person than me to go out and ask for money. But that's because I was asking for money for some other cause. And I can do that. I'm a good fundraiser. But I'm not good at asking for money for myself. So I think the people of Nova Scotia need 6 months to decide, should corporations be allowed to donate at all? How much power, when they do donate, do you feel beholden to them or not? Because I know during my election campaign, I don't see, you know, who's bringing the money in, who's dropping money off. I don't see any of that. Because, you know, I just try to knock on doors. I don't want to get wrapped up into any kind of, so that somebody can phone me up after the campaign and say, you know, I did this for you and you need to do this for me. And in fact, I did have a constituent probably a couple of months ago that had a sign on his lawn for me and was looking for some help and said, well, you said, you know, during the campaign you would help me. And this person needed, his light bill was way in arrears, his Nova Scotia power bill. And I said, well, you know, I'm not set up to pay power bills out of my office as an MLA. And I'll try and help you. And what I did was find some money through one of the churches. And I say thank you to them for doing that, Mr. Speaker. But raising money during an election campaign is one of the things we're talking about here, isn't it, really? And we're talking about, let's do that the right way. Let's find a way to do that so people don't feel during an election like, well, my vote doesn't count. Why should I bother? I'm fed up. You get elected, you're going to do the same thing as everybody else. Nothing is going to change. And people are so cynical. And I mean, since being elected, I have to say, you know, I've become more cynical myself, Mr. Speaker. And I won't mention which honourable member keeps reminding me of that, but there's one of them here. And I keep saying, I know, I don't know how to get over it, but it's part of the job, I guess. But, Mr. Speaker, we only saw, well, I didn't see the bill. I only took it out of my binder yesterday morning. But apparently, some of us saw the bill on Thursday. But the public only saw it yesterday. And if we're talking about something as important as who's going to be in this building running the province in the next year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever, I think we need to go to the people of Nova Scotia themselves and ask them in the next 6 months how they think we can better do our job. And the job starts during the election campaign. It starts before that because myself, for example, I had to run against somebody else in my constituency, right? So I had to actually run a mini campaign for that, Mr. Speaker. So I think we need to, yes, certainly I can.
On an introduction, the Honourable the Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member opposite for allowing me to do this. Here in the Speaker's gallery, there's somebody that is of no stranger to this chamber, a longtime member for Hants West, and our friend Ron Russell. We'd ask him to stand up and accept the warm greetings of the House.
A warm welcome to our former colleague, the Honourable Member from Dartmouth East. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's nice to see Mr. Russell back here. Sort of feels like speak of the devil, because somebody was talking about him yesterday and saying all good things about him. Somebody was saying really, really wonderful things about Ron yesterday. I forget who it was, but he's one of the good guys. Oh, it was Graham Steele. There you go. Member from Halifax Fairview. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't think, let's not rush this bill through. I think we need to take 6 months. And in fact, we need to take 6 months because we need to arrange for a lot of people that are involved in elections to have some kind of, we need to get feedback from them. And we all know that one of the biggest components of any election are our volunteers. And I'm pretty sure we would all be sitting at home right now or doing something else if we didn't have volunteers in our election campaigns. And even though we try and raise, funds to run an election campaign. So, you have to put your flyers out and you rent an office and you have paper you have to buy and this sort of thing. The majority, really, most of your campaign is run by volunteers. And it's really about getting out and knocking on doors and doing a lot of phoning. And I would have to say thank you to all my volunteers for all the hours, long hours during the week and the weekends that they put in doing that. And some of my volunteers, I don't even know, who donated to me or didn't. And I know for a fact that it's interesting, some people will put resources into a campaign that have nothing to do with money. And this bill doesn't address any of those kinds of items. I mean, you get people in campaigns that come in and they phone for you. And you pick people up along the way. It's interesting. In the last campaign, when I was out on a doorstep talking to a mom and her daughter, and the daughter goes to Prince Andrew High School in grade 12, and I won't mention any names, but she, when I was standing there talking, she was very interested in the political process. And isn't that what we're talking about here, is a political process on how we're going to run elections and how much of a big impact the amount of donations, the limit has on how the campaign is going to be run. And I think, if I'm right, a lot of us are facing a struggle of probably less and less volunteers. I know across Canada, volunteerism, I think the numbers are down, Mr. Speaker. And that's sad. But I think maybe part of the reason our voter turnout is down is because people just feel disenfranchised. And maybe they feel, well, if I don't have $5,000 like that corporation to give to Joan Massey or whoever, what am I really going to get out of it, But I would tell people that, MLAs, I think, You know, we're elected and we try and do a good job. And it is a hard job, that's for sure. And as we'll find out in the following week or weeks, it's going to be long, long hours. And, but, you know, part of the job, I guess. And when people, you know, it's just not a 9-to-5 job, Mr. Speaker. But we need to engage Nova Scotians. This is a perfect opportunity to bring people back in, hear about what they have to say about the way elections are run in this province, and what, you know, we need to ask them, what can we do to bring you back into the process? I mean, even, we're not talking about anything about, you know, how do you get out to vote if you have a disability. You know, there's always problems in election around those types of things. I think we could expand on this bill and really talk about some things that are important to people. I think some of us during our campaigns, we probably, you know, take in as many donations as we can, and then sometimes we're left with, you know, a debt to pay off at the end. And, you know, that's not easy on your constituency association, because, as you know, your constituency association has to take over that burden. And I would say, you know, in the election before last, mine did a great job paying off, you know, what money we had spent on those things I mentioned before, like flyers and what have you. And, you know, you try and stay within a budget. You have a budget, but then you're trying to win at the same time, Mr. Speaker. And we did things, you know, we sold tickets after I was elected for all sorts of things, you know, baskets and turkeys, Mr. Speaker. We had a bike that was given to us, I think at cost or wholesale by a business in my community. We sold tickets on that. We did a lot of little things, tiny little things that raised enough money to pay off that debt. And my constituency association, they're fantastic. I mean, my executive, they're fantastic. They, you know, when I need them, they come, okay? And they work so hard. And I haven't had time to ask them what they think about Bill 117. So that's another reason why, you know, I need to put this off. This needs to, you know, flip the process over. And we need 6 months to have feedback. And this really should have happened before the first reading, Mr. Speaker, but it's not too late. And I think, you know, our Liberal colleagues and our Conservative colleagues in here, they're listening to us. And I think they may change their minds. And, you know, we may see that headline. You know, what can $3 million buy in the province of Nova Scotia? And our Minister of Education, I know she knows that, will buy a lot of books for the libraries in our schools. And, you know, I'll give her credit. She's learned the job fast. And I think she knows what we need in the system. And she was a school board member before. But we all have our volunteers that really work hard during our campaigns and afterwards. And, you know, they are doing things for us like putting our signs up and taking the calls for our sign locations and making sure, you know, people are fed during the campaign. There's lots of things going on during a campaign that we need to all be thankful for. And I still, like I say, Mr. Speaker, I'm concerned that people try and do what they can, your constituents. And I'm hoping that if my constituents have thought that I've done a fairly reasonably good job, that they'll support me again the next time in whatever way they can. That might be in the next election campaign, they might bring in a pan of squares to my campaign headquarters. They might come in, they might have an hour out of the whole election campaign to do some phone calling. That's all right. I mean, I remember one of my volunteers in the last election campaign. It was funny because I was out helping someone during the federal campaign and knocking on doors, and I came across a constituent in my riding that said, listen, if in your next election, if you need my help, give me a call. So I had his business card, Mr. Speaker. And then, this is the strangest story, and then I was on a completely different street, and I went into someone's house. I was invited in, 2 seniors that wanted to talk to me, and I went in. And the senior was saying, you know, we had a big, long talk for about half an hour. And when I was leaving, she said, well, you know, something about she had a hair appointment. And I said, oh, where do you go? And she said, well, I don't go out. She said, my hairdresser comes in. And she mentioned the person's name, and here it was the same person that had given me this business card. So I said, I must give him a call. And I said, if you see him before me, let him know I need his help. Well, I think she had been talking to him, and didn't he show up in my campaign headquarters? So, you know, these are the people that we need to be talking to. I don't know who cooked up this bill. Seriously. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. That's on the list of bad words that I shouldn't use. Concocted. Anyway, I don't know where this bill came from. And, the minister crafted, yeah, it's a good, well-crafted. I just don't know, you know, I think there were some comments actually in one of the newspapers this morning about how the Minister of Finance doesn't seem to know, you know, how much money, how this would affect, like if you set it at 5,000 or 3,000 or 2 or 1 or whatever, how it would affect the various parties. And I just find that kind of strange, because I know yesterday morning, when I first saw this bill or knew that we would be talking about it, that we had numbers. You know, and I'm presuming, well, I know, the government has a lot more people working for them than we got working for us. So I give credit to my researchers, our researchers, this caucus's researchers, because they had some number crunching, and they did it for us, and I think they did it over the weekend. So we know how it's going to affect us, and so I find it hard to fathom that the Conservative government, and specifically the Minister of Finance, who introduced the bill, doesn't know how that is going to affect his. And I don't think that that's not making the people that work for him look very good, I don't think, Mr. Speaker. So, you know, if he said it, I guess it has to be true. But, you know, some of the things he spoke about and some of the reasons why we need to put this off for 6 months. And I wrote down some of the things he said. He talked about we need to increase transparency and increase the grassroots involvement. Well, I've talked about the grassroots involvement, but by pushing this bill through, I don't know how, really, we're going to hear from these people. And it certainly doesn't increase the transparency, I don't think. Yeah, it puts limits on contributions. One of the things I did write down that he said, and I thought it was interesting, he said, Nova Scotians should be the drivers of elections, so rich organizations can't influence us. I have to say, Mr. Speaker, that one of the things I thought was odd was, I think he said, we need to move the large donations to small donations, and by small, he means $5,000. I don't know what his idea of big and small is, but it's not the same idea that I have, Mr. Speaker. Because to me, $5,000, as I will say, is a whole lot of money. That's a lot of money. That's nothing to sneeze at in an election campaign. I bet you $5,000 you could get 2 billboards for that. I mean, what would $5,000 get me in an election campaign? Well, you could rent your campaign headquarters, no problem at all, and have money left over, I'd say. You know, maybe, I just don't understand where he would think that $5,000 is a small amount. It's kind of insulting to the people of Nova Scotia, actually, especially people in my constituency that are going to the food bank. And last week, and I apologize, I didn't have time to do up a question or resolution on this, but when I was driving into here last Thursday, and I know it was Thursday because that's the day that one of the churches in my constituency has their food bank open. And I dropped my son off at high school, and I'm driving down the road, and I passed somebody pushing a Sobeys cart, and I'm thinking, well, that's odd, because there's no Sobeys or Superstore anywhere near where the high school is. It's like a mile away. And then I drive a little bit farther, and there's two people going in the opposite direction with these grocery carts with these Sobeys bags in it. And then I pass another person, and I'm thinking, and this is early in the morning. This is, my son has to be at school at 8:30. You know where they're coming from? The food bank. They're coming from the food bank. Now, if Sobeys or Superstore are looking for the carts, I know where they can find them. And I'll tell you where they are, up around Churchill Drive in Kennedy and around Prince Andrew High School. So is this bill, by us putting this bill off for 6 months, maybe some of those people pushing those food carts, maybe they might drop into my constituency office at 63 Tacoma Drive, Suite 303, and tell me how they think this bill is going to help them. And if indeed they think $5,000 is a little bit of money, because I bet you they wouldn't. $5,000 is probably 1/3 of the income that a lot of those people are making. And any of us can fall on hard times. And it's people that have fallen on hard times that are the disenfranchised that aren't getting out to vote. And this bill is all about how are we going to get more people out to vote? How are we going to give all the people in Nova Scotia the same power? That's what I think this bill is talking about. And I think the process is backwards. We've got it backwards. I mean, you can't say, it all comes down to equality. And a vote is a vote is a vote, right? And we all joke, vote often and all this kind of foolishness. But, Mr. Speaker, we need to think about the people of Nova Scotia. Why are we rushing? Why do we want to rush this through? Is there something to hide? Do they think if we snap it up quickly, we'll find out, really be able to dig to the bottom? Because the longer we stretch it out, the more we might find out. Or the more people can look back on history at, the toll gate. It reminds me of all the potato gate and this gate and that gate. But I think it is a stain on the Liberal Party. And I think they'd be better off to give that money back to the people of Nova Scotia. Even though, like I say, those aren't even the same people probably, maybe that were even involved in the party. I don't really know. Say, Mr. Speaker, I didn't follow politics to any great extent. I mean, like some of my colleagues do. They're going to have a convention soon. They're going to pick a leader. And I think, a headline in tomorrow's paper that $3 million is going to buy this much food for Nova Scotia, that might get them a few votes. And they'd be doing the right thing. Or maybe it's going to buy some more long-term care beds. Or maybe it'll build a seniors residence somewhere. I don't know. I mean, there's lots of ways to spend that amount of money, even if it was only $2 million, and I don't know how much it is. So, will they take a stand in here? We'll find out when I sit down. Will they take a stand and talk about what they're going to do with that money? Maybe they got some good plans. I think they might. If the people of this province are going to pay into a political process, then they have to know that they're on equal footing. That it doesn't matter if they are living in affordable housing, they're living in a $300,000 house, they have 2 cars, 1 car, no car, they take the bus, they walk. That they have the same rights as the rest of us in this province. And I don't think that's the way it works right now, Mr. Speaker. That's why we need to put this off for 6 months so that we can re-engage the voters of this province. Wouldn't it be nice in the next election if we could say, yeah, there's 600 and something thousand registered voters, and you know what? 550,000 of them went out and voted. And what if we could get our young people out to vote? I mean, how many times, and women are really becoming disenfranchised in this province. I mean, I've, in both the last campaigns and in the federal campaign, come across women that have said they're not going to vote. They're not going to go out and vote. And they just feel like, what's the point? You know, and sometimes in this job you do feel like that, Mr. Speaker, and I don't blame these people. Because some days I feel like when I come in here, what's the point? And if there's anybody in here that hasn't felt that, then I think they're lying. But this is one way that we can make a change in this province. Why are we not the leaders? You know, why are we not leading the other provinces in election reform legislation? We need to put this off for 6 months. And again, you know, it's just, we can't allow this to fly through. We know that this bill could go through a select house committee. There's no sense to do that after the bill passes, Mr. Speaker. I mean, number one, the minister mentioned it in his opening remarks, but he didn't give us a plan. Nobody's seen the plan on that. We don't know what that plan looks like, who's going to be on it, and that sort of thing, Mr. Speaker. I did mention women in politics, and somebody in here mentioned, you know, maybe it was even the minister that said it's not a it's a contest of ideas, not dollars. Now, who mentioned that? I don't know, but I wrote it down because I thought, that's right, it should be. It's a good quote. I like it. But still leaving that cap at, or if you're not, it's not really a cap, but limit at $5,000, I really think it is still going to leave some people out. And I want to see our youth come back in. I mean, how many of us know young people that are more interested in getting their driver's license than they are in who they're going to vote for? It's sad. And I know we have a problem right now in this province on trying to get women on our agencies, boards, and commissions. So women are becoming less and less involved in the political process. We've got some women in here, sure, and the numbers have gone up. I don't know prior to 2003 how many women were in here, Mr. Speaker. Maybe somebody can tell me. But it's not enough. And one of the reasons probably women don't get involved in politics is because they don't think maybe they're going to make a difference. They don't try and get on these ABCs because maybe they figure somebody else that knows the government or is a friend of the government or is given a big contribution, a donation or something, they're the ones that are going to get on the ABCs. And sometimes I have to wonder if that's not really the way, you know, people perceive it. Because we've tried on that committee to make changes, and we've succeeded in some of them. But one of the things we need to do with this bill is slow down. What's the rush? It's not like there's going to be election tomorrow. Let's get it right. Let's do the right thing. Let's give the Liberal Party a chance to do the right thing. You know, women are still the number one, I call them bearers of the burden. And they're the people that are really taking up most of the child care responsibilities still. And even if, you know, you've got two people in a household and they both work, the woman still tends to do most of the, you know, at-home activities and this sort of thing. And I think, you know, dads, they're trying, but for some reason, women are just not, you know, catching up at the same rate that they should be, I believe. I mean, women still are not making as much money in the same kinds of jobs, and these are the kinds of issues that maybe stop women from getting involved in the political process, because they are very busy. They're trying to be involved in their communities and this sort of thing. It's our job in opposition to give people in Nova Scotia a chance to take part. And it's our job, you know, in our constituency offices, to have our phones open so people can phone, to have an email address so people can email and let us know what their views are on things. And if we just pass this bill, you know, when are we going to hear from these people? I'd like to know who the government consulted in the process of coming up with this bill. Did they have a chance to consult with their party membership? I mean, did that happen, I wonder? Did they try and bring in other parties? They didn't talk to us about it. Like, who did they talk about to try and find out, you know, what kind of information what should we be trying to do with this bill? Like, what is the bill really trying to do? And I think, you know, by putting it off for 6 months, maybe that'll give them some time to figure out again really what were they originally trying to do with this bill. Mr. Speaker, we need to put this off for 6 months because we need time to debate it. We need a chance for everybody in here to be able to stand up in their place and talk about why this needs to, you know, be put off for 6 months. And I think it's our duty to our constituents to do that and stay here and debate this for however long it takes. For some reason, the government has said to us, no, this must go through. And, you know, we're not willing to make amendments on it. And it's this or nothing. And that's not really the way to work. And I'll go back to something that, you know, people say to me often. They say, why can't you people just work together? They don't understand what it's like in here. And then some people will see you on TV or they're sitting up in the gallery and there's all this, like, heckling and yelling. And, I mean, some of it, seriously, is to keep you awake half the time in here. You know, because you're going to hear us repeat the same, you know, some of the same stuff that our other colleagues have said. But you know what? That's the way it's designed. And, you know, maybe it's flawed, maybe it's wrong. I don't know a better, you know, who's come up with a better way of doing it. This is what we're stuck with, right? But it's not to be confrontational. We should be trying to work together. And oftentimes, you know, my honourable members opposite, I've had, you know, a good rapport with all the ministers that I've worked with. I'm not saying that. But thanks for reminding me we need to put this off for 6 months. Even the Premier is telling me, you know, we need to put this off for 6 months. Well, he's reminding me that I need to keep saying that, put this off for 6 months. Anyway, but I'm glad they're listening over there, Mr. Speaker. And this is good. This is what it's all about. And this is what a friend of mine, she'll say this to other people too. I don't like politicians. This is a friend of my own friend that says, I don't like politicians. They don't do things right, you know, and I just, you know, she likes me. That's okay. We're still friends. But she doesn't understand the process. And it is sometimes hard in here to try and get your point across. And what we're trying to say today is that we need to look at the limits on these donations and how the Liberal Trust Fund is going to be used. And we need to take 6 months to do that. So we need to turn the bill around and we need to look at what is our duty to our constituents. I don't think this should be a deal or no deal situation. I feel like I'm on that TV show where there's boxes there and you've got, you know, the price, yeah, the price is right, spin the wheel. I mean, like, why does it have to be deal or no deal with this bill? I love that show. You know, why can't it be simply working together? It's a minority government. You know, we work together on some other things. I mean, we don't mind sharing our good ideas, and that's why we're saying we're willing to share the idea on this, to put this off for 6 months so we can talk to you. You can talk to your constituents. You can find out from people across the province what really needs to be done. If people in this province think that $5,000 is the right amount, or it isn't, maybe it should be 3, 2, 1, you know, we don't know. But where are you coming from? And really, if we know where you're coming from, then, and what are you in it for? What's in it for you? What's in it for, it should really be, Mr. Speaker, what's in it for the voters of the province of Nova Scotia? Really, as I've said before, you know, your donations, your volunteers, all these things are very important to all the MLAs. But we need to all be on a level playing field, don't we? And that's what voters are looking for from us in putting this off for 6 months, so that we can find a way to all be on a level playing field. After all, you know, what's the rush in all this? Maybe you know something we don't. Maybe you're going to call an election 2 weeks from now or something. I don't know, and you get all these $5,000 donations coming in. I really don't know. I mean, what's the rush? Why would you do this in the last week of the sitting? Why wasn't it called, you know, in the first week? Why drop the bomb now? Especially so near the Christmas season, really. And I've said that before, but you know, if we take 6 months, because really, are people going to be engaged in this right now, Mr. Speaker? Yeah, we saw headlines this morning, didn't we? Okay, NDP, end big-time political donations. We've got NDP paralyzes House. We've got Tory political fundraising bill riddled with holes. Ew, you know, I can table those, Mr. Speaker. But, you know, tomorrow, what if something happens that takes the public's mind off of these things? Tomorrow the headlines will say something.